Assalamualaikum. How are you today? So this morning we'll be discussing about the module chapter 4 regarding the human acts. So remember I sent you this module to study, so we have to discuss or review once again about this. So what about human acts? Or what's the difference between human acts as well as acts of man? So from your readings it is said distinction is made between human acts and acts of man. The human acts are those actions which man performs knowingly, freely, and voluntarily. So there are three aspects there: knowingly, freely, and voluntarily. These actions are the result of the conscious knowledge and are subject to the control of the will. We refer this action as deliberate, intentional, as well as voluntary. So there are three things that you have to remember. It is said it is the result of the conscious knowledge, where there is knowledge, the free will, as well as it is voluntary. So that is the human acts. What about the acts of man? The acts of man are those actions which happen in men. They are instinctive and are not within the control of the will. Such actions are biological, physiological movements in man such as your metabolism, respiration, fear, anger, love, and jealousy. So this is very clear to differentiate the two. If it is human action, you are using the will. So remember, you are using the will with knowledge, freedom, as well as it is voluntary. So that's a three aspect. While the acts of man, an example of this, like when you eat, hindi mo alam. You are not using your will. Then, sa iyong paglaki, hindi mo rin alam na lumalaki ka na. So that's growth. Then, respiration. So it's not in the control of the will. That's an act of man. So do not be confused between the two. So once again, the human acts, it is an action with the use of the will, with freedom as well as uh, voluntary. Then the acts of man, it's more, it's not in the control of the will. Like for example, biological, once again, lumalaki ka, the physiological movement, metabolism, ibig sabihin, kumakain ma, hindi mo na lumalayan yon. So, it's not in the will. Okay? So then there are essential attributes. For an act to be considered a human act, it must possess the following characteristics. So remember these attributes if it is a human act. So number one, it must be performed by a conscious agent who is aware of what is he is doing and its consequence. So for example, children below the age of reason, the insane, the senile, are considered incapable of acting knowingly. So, which means the agent. So, the agent is the doer. So, ibig sabihin dito, he knows what he is doing. He is aware and he is conscious. But, mang exception dito, yung bata pa na hindi pa gumagamit nito with the age of reason, the insane, so hindi sila included. Okay, that's first attribute. Then second, it must be performed by an agent who is acting freely, that is by his own volition and power. So, acting freely with his volition with his will, na talagang itong action na ito, ginagawa niya. Okay? An action done under duress and against one's will is not entirely a free action. Okay? The last attribute, it must be performed by an agent who decides willfully to perform the act. This willfulness is to resolve and to perform an act here and now and in some future time. Then human acts, therefore, being knowing, free, and willful, the lack of any of these attributes renders an act defective unless voluntary. So now, once again, these three attributes, essential attributes, if it is human acts, so once again, balik tayo doon sa sinasabi natin na with the use of the will, freedom, as well as it is voluntary. So that's the three attributes. Then there are different kinds of human action. Okay? The first is the commanded act as well as the elicited act. So remember, there are kinds, commanded act as well as elicited act. So what about this elicited act? This is an act performed by the will and are not bodily externalized. So an act performed by the will and not externally are not bodily externalized in the will, ngunit hindi nakikita in the external sa ating katawan. According to one of the author, Paul Glenn enumerates the different kinds of elicited act, in which I think I'll give you an assignment. At least you have to discuss at least 5. So the first is the wish. I think under elicited act, the wish. So this is the tendency of the will towards something, whether this be realizable or not. The object of wishing may include the impossible or that which is remotely possible, such as winning the sweepstake. Remember the program in the NJMA, yung wish ko lang. So, ang wish, pwedeng mangyayari or pwedeng hindi mangyayari. Minsan, you are wishing the impossible. So, it's a tendency, that's a tendency of the will under elicited act. While the intention, I think from the word in itself, you understand what is intention. This is the tendency of the will towards something attainable but without necessarily committing oneself to attain it. Something attainable, a tendency of the will which is something attainable without committing to oneself to attain it. Such intention like study the lesson, to attend the party, or to spend a vacation in whatever place you want to go. So once again, like after our class, you have the intention to go to the Eden Garden in South Cotabato. So that's an intention. Okay? So tendency of the will towards something attainable. Okay? But not necessarily na nag-commit ka doon. Okay? You may or you may not go. So but you have the intention to go. Okay, that's under elicited act. Then what about the consent? This is the acceptance of the will of those needed to carry out the intention. So yon, you have the intention, then you have the consent. Yung gustuhin mo, ginusto mo na pupunta ka. For example, a woman is said to show consent when she consciously attracts attention to herself. Okay. Lalakad siya, nag-flirt yung woman na yon, so parang makita siya, so she is showing a consent. Okay, kung sino yung makakita sa kanya. Kaya nga, yung iba, remember Duterte, kaya nga bawal na yung ganyan. Kasi there are times na maybe yung babaeng na yon kinukuha yung attention mo, then you are attracted, and that woman, masasabi natin na gusto yung may consent siya doon. Okay? May consent siya doon with that action. Then, election. So, you know what is election? Okay. From your readings, it is said, this is the selection of the will of those means effective enough to carry out the intention. So, election of the will. So, election is the selection of the will. So, more or less, it's like yung pagboto. So, ito yung gustuhin mo, ito yung hindi mo rin gustuhin. Okay? Depende yan sa iyong intention. Sinong pipiliin mo? Since intention is a selection of the will. Okay, example. A salesman shows election when he opts to visit a client instead of just writing him a letter. So, you get it? So, there are options. There are selections. If I am a businessman, if I am an agent, so there are two options, two selection. Either to go to that kliyente or just right to that kliyente. So, which it's which. Okay? So, yun yung, you have the option. Kaya, election is a selection of the will. Okay? Then, use. Another example or kinds of elicited acts, the used. It is the command of the will to make use of those means elected to carry out the intention. So, it's still the command of the will to make use of those means elected to carry out the intention. Then, it is an act of the will which moves a salesman to dress up and take a ride to see his client. So, remember, anong gagawin? Yung kanina sa election, may option siya. Either to visit or to ride. So, dito naman sa use, therefore, as salesman, I have to go to my client. And why? To convince him na para yung tinitinda ko, mas mabenta. Okay, malinaw yan? Para magagamit ko. Kaya nga, use. Okay? The command of the will. Okay, got it? Next, the fruition. Okay. Fruition is the enjoyment of the will, derived from the attainment of the thing he had desired earlier. The joy of a woman of being complimented by her attractiveness, or the satisfaction of the salesman in closing to deal with his client is fruition. Yung baga namunga na from that intention, from that wish, from that selection, from that consent, from that use. Now, ito na yung fruit, kaya nga fruition, ito yung fruit. So, ibig sabihin, may the satisfaction. If I was the salesman, then nilapitan ko yung aking kliyente, nakuha ko ang kanyang loob, bumili siya. So, yun na yung prutas ng iyong ginagawa. Okay, that's a fruition. So, that's the kinds of the elicited acts. Okay? Now, what about the commanded acts? Commanded acts are those done either by man's mental or bodily powers under the command of the will. Commanded acts, it can be internal or external. So commanded acts, there is still a will, man's mental bodily powers under the command of the will. Then makikita ito external, then it can be internal. For example, in the internal actions are the conscious reasoning, recalling something, encouraging oneself, controlling aroused emotion, and others. So that's an example of internal, panloob. Nag-isip ka, recalling something, then in-encourage, kaya mo yan, Sir Juars. Kaya natin ang pandemya. Kahit na wala tayo harap-harapan, kaya natin. Okay? That's more on internal. And it's up to you. Like ngayon, this is a recorded lecture. Kaya mo bang makinig? So, kaya mo bang matuto? Okay? So, it's up to you. So, that's more on internal action which is under the commanded acts. Okay? Then, another thing. The example of this external naman tayo are walking, eating, dancing, laughing, listening, reading, and others. So, I think, external, nakikita, naglalakad ka, kumakain ka, sumasayaw ka, that's still commanded act. Okay, naglalakad ka, you're also using your will. Kumakain ka, of course, iisip ka. Okay? Sumasayaw ka, tumatawa ka, using still the will. That's why that's an external. Ibig sabihin, nakikita. Okay? Iba man yung laughing na tumatawa ka, na minsan, uy, ano ba to? Tawa siya na wala ng kabuluhan ang tawa. Which means, baka tiriring din yon. Okay? But here, in this commanded act, external, nakikita. Okay? Like now, I am talking with you. Although this is recorded, but there is still the will. Okay? That's under external. Kasi nakikita nga. Okay? Is that clear? Sana naman. Then, there are also the so-called moral distinction. Human acts may either be in conformity or not with the dictates of reason. What about these dictates of reason? Take note. This refers to the shared consciousness of prudent people about the propriety of a certain action or manner of behavior. It shows, hindi shows what is permissible in a given situation, the best option as a manner of fact. So once again, refers to the shared consciousness of prudent people in appropriate certain action. So using the reason, sinusunod mo, but to the prudent persons. Okay? Kasi yung iba, they use the reason, the dictates of reason, pero mali naman yun. But here in ethics, with this dictates of reason, you are doing the right thing. Okay? Is that clear? Because here in ethics, you have to do what is right and avoid what is wrong. So, it's up to you if you follow this, the dictates of reason. But once again, the dictates of reason, dapat doon tayo sa right thing. Hindi yung mali. Okay. Then, there are three classification of the human action. The moral, the immoral, and amoral. And I think naintindihan ninyo yan. Moral, immoral, and amoral. When you talk about moral, of course, alam natin yun. The action which is in conformity with norms of the morality. So moral, you know what is right, you know what is wrong. That's moral. Okay, moral action. Then, there are good actions and are permissible. So, moral actions are good actions. You avoid what is not good. You avoid what is wrong. So, therefore, it is permissible itong moral action. Like working, studying, kung may utang ka, babayaran mo, then telling the truth, loving a friend, are examples of moral action. So once again, this is an action which is permissible. You are doing the right thing. So got it. Next, what about immoral from the word in itself? Those actions which are not in conformity with the norms of morality. So this is now the opposite. Okay? From right to the wrong thing. From good to evil. So, moral to immoral. So, alam natin yon. Then, sample. Refusing to help the needy. Why is it immoral? Na ayaw mong tumulong sa mga mahihirap. Why is it immoral? And why? Because you have the so-called social responsibility. You can share your talent, you can share your time, you can share your money if you have, especially to those who are poor, to those who are needy. But if you refuse, halimbawa, napadaan ka, may na-collapse dyan, tinitingnan mo lang, hinayaan mo lang, you are doing an immoral thing. And why? As human being, you have the responsibility to help those, to that victim. Then, sir, what about yung punta ka sa syudad, linapitan ka ng gusgusing bata, dabadyaw, kung makalabit man yan, sir, pahingi para pastil, ganyan, wala akong pagkain. Then if you have, why not give? But I would like to discourage you not to give money, but give food to that poor child. Okay? Give food because you have the responsibility. Then if you have, then you refuse to help that poor, gutom na talaga yun siya. You are doing an immoral act. Okay? Sana malinaw yan sa atin ha. Sir, kasi sir, modus operandi man yan. And I think kahit na modus operandi yan, but do not give money. Give food. Okay? When you give food to that poor individual, you are a blessing to that moment of that poor individual kung nakakain yon. So you are doing the good thing. But if you refuse, once again, you are doing the immoral one. Okay? Then another thing, of course, alam natin to, committing murder, that's immoral. Adultery, stealing, then telling lies are immoral actions. Then what about amoral? Amoral, parang neutral ito, nasa gitna. Okay? Following the norm of morality, okay? But it is neutral in relation to that norm of morality. They're either good nor bad in themselves, but certain immoral actions may become good or bad because of the circumstances. Like playing basketball is an immoral act, but playing basketball when one is supposed to be attending in a class is wrong. So playing basketball out of sense of duty in a team is also good. So nasa neutral ka. Playing basketball, then nag-escape ka sa klase, that's bad. But playing basketball for the sake of the team, that's good. So kita mo yun, nasa gitna ang amoral. So it's up to you to decide kung nasa gitna yon. Okay? Either to do good or to do the evil one. Okay? So those are the three kinds of moral actions. Moral, immoral, as well as the amoral. Then I think you have also read the imputability of the human acts. What about imputability of the human acts? This means that the person performing the act is liable for such act. It involves the notion of guilt or innocent. So the imputability, tingnan niyo ito. When a person is performing the act, he is liable for such action. If he is liable, he is accountable of that action. Natanggap niya, alam niya yung action na yon. Okay? Kung magkamali siya, o may ginawa siyang mali, papasok yung guilt, tinatawag natin. Or, pag tama yung ginawa niya, then the judgment of others, mali, maaring inosente din siya. Okay? Then we have the term, another, voluntariness. Voluntariness comes from the Latin word volunta. Voluntas, which means the will. Then, voluntariness is essential to an act. Without it, an act is mere act of man. We distinguish between perfect and imperfect and conditional simples of examples of simple voluntary acts. So there are three voluntary acts. So once again, voluntary acts comes from the Latin word voluntas, literally means will. Okay, will. So the three kinds of voluntariness, I think nabasa na ninyo. I think may example din dyan, no need to discuss further, like perfect, imperfect, the conditional voluntariness, as well as simple voluntariness. So there are also two types, the direct and the indirect voluntariness. With the examples, I think naintindihan naman niyo yan. Then I told you to answer the three. Then I think you have already submitted your assignment. But there are some hindi pa nakasubmit, but I'm still accepting kung meron. Pag wala, I'm not forcing you to submit the assignment. And of course, yung sabi ko, this is a trial exam na pinasagot ko. I think today is the deadline. Thursday is the deadline. So, hopefully, nakasubmit na lahat. Na-check ko na yung iba, pero hindi pa natapos. Kasi ang ating internet, medyo mahirap din. So, timing lang. Pero hopefully, nakasubmit na kayo. Then, I also sent to you the chapter 5 in our modules. This is now the modifiers of the human acts. So, take note. We are now in chapter 5. There are 3 modifiers. What about these modifiers? Okay. Man does not act in a vacuum. He is an organism responding and reacting to stimulus. Remember in your psychology, the stimulus-response relationship? Okay? Halimbawa, may somebody kumakain ng mangga. Diba? You salivate. Yung saliva mo, tumutulo. So, yung the stimulus is there, pinapakita sa'yo, then you responded that stimulus. Okay? Kung may kumalabit sa'yo, kung may naghawak sa'yo, Okay? The stimulus-response relationship. Okay. The authors point out the following modifiers of the human act. So there are 5 modifiers of the human acts. Take note. The ignorance, passion, fear, violence, habit. So there are other modifiers aside from the 5 which are worth discussing, but the limitation of this module, such as hypnotism, brainwashing, mental conditioning, and cultural imposition. So that's another modifiers the human action. But first, we have to discuss the 5 modifiers. Ignorance. What about ignorance? Okay? I think you're familiar with the saying, ignorance of the law excuses no one. Kung harap-harapan pa sana tayo, pa-discuss ko ito sa iyo harap-harapan, tatanungin kayo, ignorance of the law excuses no one. And why? If you are new to that place, for example, here on Cotabato, we have the traffic rules, but hindi na-implement. But if you go to the other cities, you go to Davao, pag jaywalking ka, huli ka. Pag wrong parking ka, huli ka. Pag hindi ka sumusunod sa batas, huli ka. Dan sabihin, sir, sorry sir, hindi man ako taga dito. Marami ha, yung especially yung the speed limit, punta ka doon sa Tantangan, sa Tupi, papuntang Jansan, may speed limit yung sasakyan. 50 kilometers per hour or 40 kilometers per hour. Yung iba hindi sinusunod. Yung pag may binaril, di ba? Nahuli, sir, taga Cotabato kasi ako, sir. But remember, ignorance of the law excuses no one. So in that sense, para hindi ka maignorante, anong gagawin mo? Of course, you have to observe. You have to observe. Okay? You have to look, maybe listen, then sundin. Okay? But there are times na talagang minsan, nabibiktima din tayo. In my experience, of course, taga-bundok ako. Then when I studied in Cebu City, grabe yung traffic lights nila. Then one time, nahuli ako sa police. Naka-ano pa kasi during that time, I was a missionary. Naka-Roman color, yung pari-pari. Then to the point, nakakahiya. But ignorance of the law excuses no one. So that was my learning experience. Susunod, hindi ko nagawin. Pero hindi ako pinatawad sa pulis. Pinapunta ako sa isang lugar, then nag-lecture siya. Okay? Kasi first offense pa man yun. Pero nakakahiya. Okay? Kaya nga, ignorance of the law excuses no one. Kaya nga, ignorance is the absence of knowledge which a person ought to possess. Kaya nga, absence of knowledge which a person dapat meron. But the problem, kaya nga, mag-observe ka, magmasid ka. Okay? So, there are types of ignorance. Kayo nang magbasa dyan. Vincible, invincible. Then, the second modifiers is the so-called passion. Passion. The other term for passion is concupiscence. Another term for passion is concupiscence. So, lipat lang sandali ha. Kasi medyo may ulan. Okay. So another modifier is passion. What about this passion? So another term for passion is concupiscence. So either the tendencies towards the desirable object or the tendency away from the desirable or harmful thing. Like example, the former are called positive emotions, the latter are negative emotions. The positive emotions includes love. Okay. In passion, kaya nga in the teleserye before. I don't know if you have watched the Passion de Amor. So there are two. It can be negative, it can be positive emotions. When ito positive is more on love, more on the desire, hope, and bravery. But in the negative passion, of course, alam natin if it is negative, hatred, galit ka, takot ka, despair, fear, and anger. Galit na galit ka. Okay? So there are types of passion. So kayo nang magbasa dyan, antecedent as well as the consequent passion. Okay. So we'll proceed to the third. Modifiers fear. It is a disturbance of a mind of a person who is confronted by an impending danger or harm to himself or to loved ones. The distinction is made, however, between an act done with fear and an act done out of fear. So, fear, takot. So, sabi nga, out of fear, ginawa mo, or with fear, natatakot ka. With fear, takot ka. Out of fear, ginawa mo dahil, okay, may example dyan. Tingnan yung example. A certain actions which by nature are dangerous or risky are done with varying degree of fear. Halimbawa, climbing a cliff, flying an airplane through a storm, diving for pearls, or arresting notorious killer are examples of with fear. Ayon. Halimbawa, if I am in the authority, pumupunta ako doon sa mga drug addict, yun yung with fear, natatakot ako. Okay. If I climb to the cliff yung bangin, nandoon yung takot. Okay, that's with fear. What about out of fear? Take note of this, out of fear. The child reads his book out of fear of his mother. Okay, the child read his books out of fear with his mother. So alam natin yun. So, with fear at saka out of fear. So malinaw yan. Then proceed in reading. Next is violence. From the word in itself, I think we are familiar with violence. But we have to discuss this. Violence refers to the physical force exerted in a person by another free agent for the purpose of compelling the said person to act against his will. Example of violence, okay, an action which is against his will is violence. Like, for example, bodily torture. Yung tinorture ka. So, it's against your will. Kaya that's why, that's violence. Maltreatment. Minaltrato ka. Isolation. What about isolation? Yung pinadala ka sa isang lugar na nag-iisa ka. That's also violence against you as a person. Okay. What about mutilation? Yung pagputol-putol, pinutulan ka. That's also violence. Remember our friends, the ISIS, the Abu Sayyaf, di ba? Yung double death, patay na yung mga tao, tinatadtad pa, pinupugutan, that's violence. Of course, violence against humanity, violence against a person. Okay? Kaya nga, ang ganda sana yung in Islam. If you kill an innocent person, para na rin you kill the whole humanity. Ang ganda ng turo. But there are some, sinisira itong turong ito. Kaya nga, ito yung tinatawag nating violence. Violence can also result emotional violence, physical violence, okay? Like Republic Act 9262. Remember Republic Act 9262, yung VAUSI? Violence Against Women and the Children Act of 2004. Domestic violence. Binubugbog ang asawa, nire-rape ang asawa, sinasampal ang asawa. Economic, kaya ang asawa, economic violence, kapit lang. Kasi pag wala si Mr. kawawa kami. But that's an economic violence. Okay? Of course, psychological violence. That's against, ito na yung VAUSI. Okay? Then the last modifiers is habit. According to Glenn, the author, is a lasting readiness and facility born of frequently repeated acts for acting in a certain manner. So habit is a repeated action according to Glenn as an author. A repeated action, paulit-ulit. Then habits are required inclinations towards something to be done. They assume the role of the second nature, moving one who has them to perform certain acts with relative ease. The word habit forming that we use to refer to a certain experiences shows how easy it is for one to acquire a habit. It also implies that a habit is not that easy to overcome or alter. It requires strong-willed person to correct a habit successfully within a limited period of time. Thus, alcoholic and smokers find it almost impossible to reform. Okay, yung habit, if it is a repeated action, sabi nga, ang hirap din hindi basta-basta na matanggal yon. But with the help, with the use of the will, kaya nga kailangan willpower, political will, pwede yang magawa ng paraan. Okay? Pwedeng mabago. Like sabi nga dito, a drunkard, alcoholics, yung palagi ninigarilyo, sana yung mga kalalakihan dito o kababayan, huwag kayo manigarilyo. Okay? Kasi pag nagiging habit yan, ang hirap na yan tanggalin. Okay? Ang hirap na yan tanggalin. Kaya nga yung iba, sige nagsabi, ay haram ang sigarilyo. It's against the will of Allah. Hanggang istorya lang. Kaya nga sabi ko, kung may sobra pa sa haram, tapos na nigarilyo ka, go to hell. Okay? Yun. Kasi alam mo yung mali. So it's not accepted. It's unethical, it's immoral. But sabi nga, if a habit is a repeated action, so therefore, malaking problema kapag hindi yon maituwid. Okay? Like the smokers, once again, the drunkard or the alcoholics. So yan. Another example siguro, itong habit, a repeated action. In ethics, in biology, okay lang. Yung tinatawag nating masturbation. But in ethics, it's a big no-no. Remember this one, it's a big no-no. Okay? Because it is a misuse of sex. From the word misuse, so ibig sabihin, hindi pwede. But this masturbation, if it becomes a habit, ang hirap na yan tanggalin. Ang hirap na yan tanggalin. Kahit na mag-asawa ka pa, pag hindi mo yan na bago, mark my word, especially mga kalalakihan, pag hindi mo yan baguhin, although science would tell us na it's part of human growth, but in ethics, it is not part of human growth. Use your will. Okay, na pwede palang alisin yan. Pwede palang tanggalin yan. Pero once again, pag hindi yun matatanggal, it becomes a habit, so therefore, you have to do it repeatedly for the rest of your life. Yung ulit-ulit mong action. Okay? Malinaw? Sana malinaw yan sa lahat. Then, for your assignment, I think I already told you in our group chat that you have to answer the 4 questions here. So the first one, how would you explain the saying, ignorance of the law excuses no one? And I think I give you an example, and you can give a lot of examples. Hindi not necessary kopyahin mo yung sinabi ko. Then the second question, why are you not justified in doing wrong because of passion? And you know what is passion, sabi natin. It can be positive, it can be negative. Then why are you not justified in doing wrong? Okay? Because of the so-called passion. Then the third, why are actions done out of fear accountable is unaccountable action? So remember, I told you, with fear and out of fear. Then the questions here, why are why are actions done out of fear is accountable action. Okay, take note. Then the last one, why are we accountable for actions done out of habits? Okay, remember, habits is a repeated action. Then the questions here, why are we accountable for actions done out of habits? You know that one. So that's why you have to and I think its number is 5 points, so 20 points lahat-lahat. So and that will be your assignment, and that will be submitted this coming Thursday. Yes, Thursday. Then, yes, Thursday. Then by Tuesday, continue doing your work. Then Thursday, I'll be sending another chapter of our module, still regarding the ends of the human acts. And with that, if you have some query, clarification, you can ask to our group chat, or you can directly ask in my messenger kung ayaw na sa group chat. But please read our module kasi nandyan everything is there. Everything is there. Then understand, I think the terms there are very simple. May mga example naman. So, maintindihan ninyo yon. Okay? Basa lang kasi sabi ko nga, wala man tayong magawa because of this pandemic. So, the easiest na ginagawa ko, nile-lecture ko lang, nire-record ko. So, it's up to you. Then, you read, you listen, at siya naman, wala kang matutunan. Okay? So, with that, we'll see each other once again. Hindi ko man kayo kilala, pagmumukha ninyo, pero at least magkikita-kita tayo pag wala ng pandemic. Kita tayo sa ating college, pareho man yung college natin, then pareho yung major natin. So, kaya nga, sama-sama pa rin tayo. Hopefully, mawala na itong pandemic. So, hopefully, I'll be one of your professors din sa mga peace major ninyo when you become third year as well as fourth year. Okay? I was the program head before in the College of Arts and Sciences sa peace. Ngayon, si Ustads nang pumalit. But I'm still the program head doon sa kabila sa graduate college in peace and development. So once again, thank you for listening. God bless you all and have a nice day. Mabuhay kayong lahat.